So the word it or the phrase "it depends" is a common phrase that I use a lot in one of the courses that I teach. See, I teach orthopedic assessment, and when I'm teaching my students about different injuries and illnesses and conditions, they usually say, "So how do we treat that? What do we do for that?" And my response, probably the reason why my traps are so tight and have hypertrophy levator scapula, is because I usually shrug and say, "It depends." And so you can imagine the students are normally like, "Depends. What does it depend on?" And then I stop and say, "It depends on the patient." So they go, "Well, what does that mean?" Well, it depends on what the patient wants, what the patient needs, what the patient does, who the patient is. And then you can imagine that there's someone in the front seat who's pretty hyped up on caffeine and says, "Well, how do I study for that?" And then I tell them, "You don't." I can't see my slides, so I'm just not ready to be quick here. I tell them you don't study for that. And you can kind of imagine the look on their face. You mean you can't study for that? And what I tell them is you learn how to take care of your patients by talking to your patients. See, we don't treat injuries, we treat patients. In order to know how to treat your patient, you have to know how to talk to your patient. And oftentimes we kind of forget about that. We want to go straight to what's the diagnosis or what's the treatment, instead of to get to know who the patient really is and let our treatment be determined by talking to our patients and having our patients be part of that conversation. And so I'm probably going to move around a little bit here, but I might go back to the podium. And if I go back to the podium, it's because when I get in front of an audience and I'm talking about this cultural competency and patient values, I get so excited and think that I'm never going to see you again. So I get off on tangents and I want to tell you everything that I possibly know. So one of the things that I normally start with also is that this presentation alone can't make you culturally competent. You can't take care of that in 45 minutes. But hopefully, I get you to start thinking about things today to help you along in your journey toward being more culturally competent, cultural, or practicing cultural humility, or becoming more aware of your patient's values. And so one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is the bubble with 3 circles. Anyone know what that bubble, the bubble with 3 circles, or the 3 circle bubbles represents? Everyone's shy. So it's the diagram that's used to represent evidence-based practice. When we talk about evidence-based practice, and people say, "What's the evidence?" Where does it say that in the book? Evidence-based practice is all different types of evidence. One type of evidence is the one that we're really familiar with, the research evidence. What does the research say? And that's very important evidence. We also know if you have a preceptor who's been practicing for a long time, it works because they've seen it work and they know it works, and that's their clinical experience. That's also evidence. If you've had success with something, it works. But the one part of evidence-based medicine that we often forget is really, really important, and it's patient values. And when you're making decisions on, or when you're helping to make decisions as part of the team or the medical team, your patient values are just as important. And so I'll give you an example. When I first started practicing athletic training, I got the opportunity to go to the Virgin Islands. And I was the women's basketball athletic trainer for the National Virgin Islands team. And I was like, okay, so US Virgin Islands. I packed my kit like I normally would. I took over some coolers. I made sure I had tons of ice bags. Then when I got there, there was half the stuff that was in my kit. And the first day after basketball practice, I did what athletic trainers at least used to do. We used to make tons of ice bags, right? Putting ice bags everywhere on knees, on elbows, and shoulders. We don't do that as much anymore. Maybe we do. But after practice, no one asked. No one wanted ice. I just got to know the women on the team. It was my first day, trying to figure out what they need, but no one asked. So I was like, okay. So we get back to the hotel, I get a knock on the door. And I brought your little flexi rolly thing. For what? And one wanted to ice. And they have these really big palm leaves from the Virgin Islands. I don't know what palm tree it came from, the type of palm tree, a really big palm leaf. And they use this brown ointment called Iota ointment. It's a tar-like ointment. You might have seen it before. Back in the day, you used to use a lot of boils to help boils kind of rise to the surface. And their thinking was that what they were told from their parents and people who have been using it for a long time, you put this Iota ointment on your knee, put the bamboo leaf on top of it and wrap it, and it draws the inflammation from the joint. So you can imagine me, I'm like, oh, how do I learn more about that? What's the evidence? Where can I find the research? Of course, there was none, but it worked for them. And the grandparents had done it for years, the parents had done it for years. So I was like, well, what do I do here? Do I let them continue to use it? Or if I tell them I can't find any evidence that it works, they're gonna run me out of the Virgin Islands, and I definitely won't stay in the Virgin Islands. But I wanted to build trust. So I said, tell me a little bit more. Tell me how long you keep it on. And then I went searching to see if there were any contraindications to that, and I to that, and B. And then slowly but surely, as I started to interact with the women, and they gained my trust a little bit. So let's try this instead. Let's talk. If you're going to do that and bring later on, you also try something else for your knee pain. And so I took the approach of this was part of their patient values. This is what they did. It would be almost equivalent to me telling my grandma that a salt doesn't cure everything. Right? Does it work for something? Absolutely. Is it going to hurt them? Couldn't find anything that was a contraindication. If I would have said, there's no evidence, that's not gonna work. They would have trusted me, they would have allowed me to let them experience some other types of treatment, and I would have got ran out the Virgin Islands. And that's just one example. I could think of a lot of them, but that was the US Virgin Islands. I had no idea that the culture would be so different, that I was gonna go to an area or a different place that didn't practice medicine the same way that I did, but as part of their patient values, I had to find to make it work along with the evidence and along with my clinical experience. So your patient's values matter. And so we talk about like who are patients. Patients come from all over. Patients can be very diverse. That can be diverse as it relates to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, nationality, region of the country they come from, their religion. There's so many different things that make our patients diverse. And then on top of it is a thing called culture. And when you think about culture, culture is a way of believing or a belief system that a group of people have because they share something in common. So if we use that basic definition of culture and all the different identities that I mentioned before, each person is very, very unique, is made up or has very different identities that they represent. If you look at this picture here, it's called the waterline of visibility. Some people call it the iceberg of diversity. It's very interesting because it shows all the different things that make us who we are. Occupation, our personalities, those identities that we talked about before. And you can see some of those identities people may not see. But the ones you can see, unfortunately, are the ones we typically tend to get discriminated against. So when people say, why do we always talk about race when we talk about diversity? Why are we talking about gender? Why do we talk about age? Because we can see those things. The more visible your identities are, oftentimes more likely people may use that to discriminate you against. So that's what happens in healthcare. So a lot of times when we talk about health disparities and things that are more prevalent in one population and people in the other, there are multiple reasons for that, historical, structural, but also a lot has to do with which of our identities are visible. So people often say, there are a lot of different health disparities and what do we do? And, you know, I didn't become a healthcare professional, provider or healthcare student to treat people differently. And I grew up, my parents told me to treat everyone the same, for the golden rule. Treat everyone like you want to be treated. The problem with treating everyone the same as it relates to people who have had some health disparities or been treated unfairly is that they have different starting points. Everyone doesn't have, or everyone isn't starting from the same starting point on the journey to optimal health and wellness. And that's where the terms equality versus equity come in. Sometimes if you treat everyone equal, you're treating some people less, right? And so treating everyone equal sometimes is being unfair. And you can see that case in the case of the track, right? If you're running the 200, you all start at the same spot. Someone's at a disadvantage because the track is shorter on the inside compared to the outside. So you have a staggered start. If you have people who have, or people who experience different discriminations, and they live in a different area, and they have less access to care, they've been discriminated against, so we really have to focus on making sure that everyone gets what they need. So instead of treating everyone the same, it's treating everyone so that they get what they need in order to achieve optimal health. So if we look at what are the factors that influence our health, not the social determinants of health yet, but just the factors, what decides if we're healthy or not. And you can see from this slide here, our genes and our biology is only a really small part of what determines our health. The other parts of it, another really big part, you would look and say 30% is health behaviors, 40% social and economic factors. 20%, I can't see here. Is it 10% or 20%? There we go. 10% is clinical care, and 10% is physical environment. But I would argue that health behaviors have a lot to do with social and economic factors. Clinical care has a lot to do with social and economic factors, where the quality of care you have, the hospitals that are available to you, the insurance that you have. Physical environment, where you live, the communities you live in, and what healthcare is close to you, has a lot to do with social and economic factors. So it's really hard to tease out into this nice little pie chart that's listed here, used to be talked about a long time ago. And even health behaviors, oftentimes people say, well, people make bad decisions. And I would argue that people, especially people from marginalized populations, have bad options, bad choices. So bad behavior, or the bad behaviors, maybe for example, the food they choose, might be because they're not healthy food options available. They're because of bad choices. And so the majority, I would argue, the majority of what influences our health has a lot to do with social and economic factors. So the health behaviors, I think, really comes down to being a social and economic factor, which means that only 10% of our health is related to genetic factors. 90% comes from somewhere else. It's not biology or bad habits. So when we talk about health disparities, and what is a health disparity, I'm gonna move around for a minute here. I want to make sure that I cover everything is that important. So just to give you the definition of health disparities, I'm going to read it for you because there's different definitions. I want to make sure you get this right. They'll come back in. Health disparities are preventable differences in the rate of the occurrence of disease, injury, illness, balance, or opportunities to achieve optimal health. And the key word here is preventable. And some common health disparities are things like Black men are 70% more likely to die from a stroke than white people. Native Americans are twice as likely to have diabetes. Black children are twice as likely to have asthma than any other population. And the list goes on and on and on. And most of these health disparities are based on race, where someone lives, and some of those factors that we saw in that iceberg of diversity, where people tend to be discriminated. So when we look at what are those social and economic factors I was hinting to before, and really play a big part in why, what are the factors that contribute to someone's health. The CDC and Health and Human Services, they divide the social determinants of health into 5 different categories. If you look at the World Health Organization, they divide it into a little bit more, and they get a little bit more specific, but all of these are still included in this. Economic stability. Economics are related to your healthcare. Education, access, and quality. There's a correlation between your level of education and the status of your health. Healthcare access and quality. What hospitals are you able to go to? Are you able to travel to get the best care? You see, that can be related to not only access and quality, but also economics. There's a lot of overlap between these different categories. Neighborhood and built environment. This might come to play when we talk about that scaffolding and they feel about Black children being more likely to have asthma than white children. What are the buildings they're living in? Is it easy to go for a walk after school? Are there even sidewalks? Are there parks? All of these factors on how healthy someone is. And there's a social and community context. This one really is about your social support system. You have family members around you to support you. You have a caregiver, and some people even say that discrimination and acts of violence can fall in this category as well. And so all of these things are part of what influences someone's health. Now I made this picture myself. Good job. So if it looks a little weird, I tried. Wanted to make to give the example. There could be a hospital right in the middle of the city. If you look at the different neighborhoods, getting to that hospital is very different. You would say that the hospital is of equal distance to all the different neighborhoods. I know my scale is a little off, right? Equal distance, but there's equity there for everyone that gets to that hospital. You know, some people are in a nice neighborhood with the green trees and the cars and the pretty houses, have a straight road to the hospital and you drive there. There's another neighborhood, you have to cross the tracks, the train tracks, you have to take a bus that takes you to the other neighborhood, and then you eventually get to the hospital. In the one neighborhood with water, the only way to get to the hospital is to take a ferry. It'll take a lot of time if you have an emergency. So just a simple example of even the places we live, even when things look like they're equal, there are other factors involved that don't make things equitable for all of our patients. We need to be mindful of these things. We need to know our patients, find out what their barriers may be and what may be contributing to their health, other than blaming the patient for bad behaviors and not taking care of themselves. And so what I really wanted to let you know is another factor that plays in, because we know even when you account for social economic factors or economic factors, there's still health disparities. And when you look at that, you might say, well, why are there still health disparities when everyone has equal rights? You have to stop and think that maybe people aren't still getting the same care. Maybe there's discrimination. That sounds a little weird because most people don't think healthcare providers get into the field to purposely discriminate against someone, but we all have biases. And so we really have to be aware of our patients and make sure that we're practicing culturally appropriate care. And I'll get into some tips on how to do that later. But one of the things that I wanted to mention is that culture and how we perceive healthcare can really determine our outcomes. And so I wanted to read a couple of things for you. The way culture can dictate how we feel about medicine, whether we trust our healthcare providers, whether there's historic reasons not to trust healthcare providers. So not only are there socioeconomic factors and the social experience of health, there's some social things that may be influencing healthcare as well. These social factors or these cultural factors can determine whether a patient comes back for care. It can determine whether the patient actually takes your advice or not, or whether they go home and do something different because they think you gave too much medicine or told them to take too much, they cut it in half. And so really we have a lot of cultural influences on what determines health. And so I was talking to a group of students earlier today, and when we talk about being aware of someone's culture and being aware of social determinants of health, and being aware of the health disparities that exist, it seems that we're pretty aware. We know these things exist. We know that there's some differences in the way that people get treated in healthcare. We know that there's some barriers to access to care, to quality care, to all the things we've talked about. But one of the things that we don't do is we don't tell people what to do next. What do you do with all that awareness? And so if you look at the phases of cultural competency, the first part of cultural competency is cultural awareness. The next steps are cultural skill and cultural knowledge. And as part of cultural skill and cultural knowledge, I want to spend the next few minutes talking about things that we can do to make sure we are addressing our patients' needs. I think I laid out the patient's needs for you as fast as I could in a little a small talk. So this isn't the only talk, or the only presentation, or the only form of education that you're going to have on this, right? Everyone's going to go out and learn more. And so one of the things that I wanted to say is the first thing that you can do to help your patient is provide a welcoming and inclusive environment. A welcoming and inclusive environment. If you look at the picture of the gentleman there, does he look welcoming? Not so much. And there's really small things that you can do here that can make a big difference. Some of those things could be your posture, your tone. When you talk to your patients, are you standing or are you sitting, making direct eye contact, coming to their level, trying to develop trust? Are there pictures in the facility where everyone is represented? Or do your pictures only show one population of individuals? Do you put up signs to say everyone welcome here? We treat all the same. There's a really cool athletic training poster that we use to talk about how athletic trainers are really dedicated to healthcare. It has all the different values of athletic training. Just having that and having people walk by a sign that says, we want to take good care of you. We're going to treat you no matter who you are. Makes a really big difference for someone who may come from a culture that distrusts healthcare providers, who haven't gone to healthcare providers. So that's the first step. And when you meet someone, one of the most personal things that someone asks is their name. Find out how someone wants to be referred to. And if they tell you the name and you can't pronounce it, don't shorten it and say, okay, I'm going to call you Z then. How's it going, Z? Really trying to make sure you know how someone wants to be addressed, learning how to say their names. These are really small things that don't take any additional education. They don't take any additional resources. These little small things go a big way to start to develop trust and start to develop a culture of inclusiveness, welcoming. The next thing that you can do is change your medical history questions. You just learn them and you're like, go away, you just memorize them. You're going to give us new ones. But we all get the medical history questions right away. We're like, okay, what happened? Why did it happen? Where does it, how does it, how bad is it? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, and we rattle them off. We get all the information about the injury that we need, but we don't get the information about the patient. And so what I want to tell you is you can change and be more cultural and provide more culturally competent healthcare by just changing the questions that you ask. And so my favorite is, what is the most important thing to you as it relates to this injury or illness or treatment, whatever they're there for? What's the most important thing to you? That's a pretty easy question, and you can really get some really good information from that question. I have a friend, she's a writer and a drawer, and she writes and draws for a living. She was in a really bad accident. And when she was being rushed to the ER, and the ER doctor met her, met the degree, and then the paramedics at the door and talking to her and said, "You're gonna be okay, we're gonna save your legs." She said, "I care about my legs, I care about my arm." That was just one example of how sometimes we this cultural imposition just because something is important to us, it may not be important to the next person. We're putting our values. He was assuming that the most important question was, will I be able to walk? But he didn't know who she was. If he did, he would have known the most important question he could have answered is, will her arm be okay? So finding out what matters most to your patient versus assuming what matters the most to them is really important. And what a way to gain trust. Wait a minute, that's what was important to me. You want to know what I want? Has anyone ever gone to the doctor and said, I just hope they give me a cough medicine, or I just hope they give me antibiotics, I just want something to sleep, and you leave and you don't have that thing that you needed, that you went there for, but no one ever asked what you really wanted? That's a really important history question, and it'll help you take better care of your patient. The next one is, do you have any questions or concerns? We don't often stop. We give people a lot of instructions. We don't ask you, you might say, go home and ice today. You didn't ask if they had access to ice. You assume that they had a home at all or a place to stay. You assume that maybe they had ice maker in their refrigerator and they could just get ice really easy. So asking that question usually gives people the chance to say, well, I'm not sure if I can do that, or I'm not sure, or that medicine's really expensive, or I want to make it to the senior prom, and it be delayed. So you're giving the person to tell you what they may be concerned about. That's a lot better than having the patient leave and not take your treatment or not take your advice at all. Asking them if they have questions or concerns. And then the last one, you're giving them one last opportunity. Is there anything that you want to tell me that I didn't ask, or that I don't know, or that I haven't asked? That's a really great open-ended question. Oh yeah, by the way, my neck also hurts. Why did you say that? Yeah, so but if you give you an opportunity to get any additional information that maybe they didn't understand, you can ask for in the way that they didn't understand, they can tell you more information. So by adding these 3 history questions, or at least the first one, who matters to you the most, you can actually make sure that you're taking care of your patient and getting to know your patient and what social determinants of health may be affecting their care and their access, what barriers they may have, concerns they may have, and then you can help them address those. So what else can you do? You can educate yourself and others. There are tons of resources I'm going to share real soon that you can read, that you can go to educate yourself in ways to be more culturally competent, to be more patient-centered, and put your patient at the front of their healthcare. Also, you can take a leadership role as a healthcare provider. I'm currently writing a textbook on social determinants of health, and I realize that we talk a lot about social determinants of health, what they are, but we don't tell people how to fix them. When we ask the questions for the patient, we're helping that one individual patient, but guess what? Another patient will come into our home with pretty similar things because structurally and systemically, there's things that need to be changed. And so as a healthcare provider, you may see people affected by these social determinants of health every day. So we need more people to become advocates, to go out and make sure that we're expressing these concerns, whether it's voting, whether it's being an advocate for resources, whether it's doing service work. But we need people to get involved, service to the organization, whatever your healthcare organization is, whatever your community organization is, and really advocate for change at the organizational level, at the community level, at the state level, at the government level. Because we're helping individuals, if we change those healthcare questions, we help our patients with resources. We need to make sure that we do something so we can prevent people from having those barriers in the first place. And really try to develop your own opportunities to create change. And I'll give you an example. I teach a class of cultural competency. One of the first things that I ask my students to do is to go out and do a map of the neighborhood where they work, where they will play. And I tell them to map it out, and talk about how many grocery stores there are, what's the nearest hospital, do a community map. And they can pick whatever environment that they want. I try to get them to pick one where their clinical site is, or where they're working. Find out who lives in the neighborhood. Is there only one healthcare provider? Are there community resources? Are there grocery stores? Are there tons of fast food places and liquor stores and no grocery stores? And try to find out what's around in the community. Then you can start to get an idea of what are some of your barriers your patients may have as it relates to transportation, as it relates to access. And this is something that you can do on your own. And one of the things that I tell them to do after that is think about one thing that you can do to make the community better. They often say, little me, I can't do anything. You have to come up with something. And it's pretty amazing at some of the things that they come up with. And a lot of it has to do with getting involved in the community, writing letters to people who have the ability to make change, talking to people who have the ability to get more resources, maybe planting a garden outside of the school, maybe doing some other service activities that directly help your patients and some of the social determinants of health that they deal with on a daily basis. So what I really want to leave you with, you met with me earlier, I have a lot of material, at least I talk about, is that it's much more important to know what sort of patient has a disease and what sort of disease the patient has. If you keep that at the forefront, you're going to be providing better care to your patient. Another way of looking at it, or another way of thinking about all of this together is, when you think about your patient, think about making your patient the CEO of their healthcare team. Make them part of the decision makers, make them the CEO of their healthcare team. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Harriell. So at this time, we're going to invite our panelists to join us, and we're going to field some questions. We'll have Katie Smith, future Dr. Katie Smith, sorry, lead the panel. So I'll have our students introduce the panel next. Okay. Come on down. Sure.
Katie Smith is an instructor and master of athletic training and director of operations for the Advanced Health Data Institute at SLU University. She's currently pursuing a Ph.D. in public health studies and concentration in health outcomes research. Her research interests include demonstrating the value of athletic training services for quality, affordable, and accessible healthcare. Katie also serves as the chair of the Radical Council on Practice Advancement, co-chair of the APHA Sport and Recreation Injury Committee, and team lead on the NACA Athletic Training and Public Health Task Force. Also, Destinee is her fourth year as an athletic trainer of East St. Louis Senior High School. Before taking the helm in St. Louis, she served as a graduate student, teaching assistant at Temple University, as well as athletic trainer for Temple's cheerleading teams. Originally from North Carolina, Destinee received an undergraduate degree in exercise and sports science at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and following completed her master's work in kinesiology at Temple University. Research interests include cultural competence, humility, and athletic training, and increasing lucidity with profession. In her spare time, Destinee enjoys volunteering in the profession, like serving with the National Athletic Training Association, and multiple hobbies include reading.
Rabia Rahman, Ph.D., R.D., L.D., pronounced she, her, is a registered dietitian, associate professor, and serves as the interim chair of the Department of Nutrition and Dietetics in St. Louis University. Her work as a registered dietitian has been primarily in the area of eating disorders, but has expanded to include eating disorders and nutritional needs and transgender populations. Dr. Rahman's research emphasis includes the advancement of nutrition care for all individuals free from stigma and bias, with a specific focus on the care of the transgender and gender diverse population to reduce health disparities. The final member of our panel is Enzo Okpoye. He is originally from Nigeria, but moved to the U.S. on a soccer scholarship about 8 years ago. He attended a prep boarding school in New Jersey called Blair Academy. From Blair, he was recruited to play D1 soccer at Yale University. There, he obtained a BA in political science and wrote a senior thesis on economic divergence in the United States and how it exacerbated the effects of COVID-19 on low-income Americans. Enzo transferred to SLU last fall to play out his remaining year of NCAA eligibility, and he's currently involved in the graduate certificate program at the Shaped School of Business.
All right, well, I think I can speak on behalf of everyone. Thank you, Dr. Harriell, for a great conversation, for a great presentation. We have a lot to reflect on. While I think of some of your fantastic questions to ask, I will open it up to the panel. I had the privilege of actually seeing Ms. Grove present a weekend ago at the Ohio Educators and Student Leadership Conference, and she spoke also on social hotels. And I'd like to invite you and others to comment as well about some other examples of how you incorporated acknowledging and accounting for your patients, making sure that health in your work at East University.
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you. Dr. Harrell's examples were like spot on when she was talking about them. I could just recount some of the things that I do in my practice. You know, getting to know your community, having them draw that map is so important. When I was at Hawaii, I was talking about how East St. Louis is a food district. There's one grocery store in the entire 800 blocks. You know, it fits in this room. It's incredibly small. But like one of the things that we can do to combat food scarcity and nutrition is, you know, go into that grocery store and say, you know what, I've been in here. I know what you all have in your community. And these are some great things that we can get and save a lot on State Street. You know, driving through that community, understanding what their physical environment is like. Are there sidewalks? No. So, you know, if there's not a place for them to safely participate in the home exercise program outdoors, how are we making those accommodations? There's just so many examples about if you take a step back and think before you give your treatment or you create your treatment plan, you know, where do we see this fail? You don't want to anticipate that your patients are failures. You know, but you understand that there are all these other economic and social things that can cause your treatment plans to fulfill. And so before we issue this out, before we send this out, before we call home, you know, can we stop and think, where am I going to address this issue? How can we improve this? How can we make this plan, you know, as foolproof as we can? And I said, it literally is everywhere.
Any others like to add anything, like incorporate some of these things into practical examples of doing it in practice?
Sure. So Destinee talked a little bit about nutrition and what role that plays. So I'm obviously coming from the lens of nutrition. So for us, it is known, do they have access to food? How far is that access to food? And are they eligible for food assistance programs? That's another question that I asked. Maybe you might ask. So we want to know, do they have access to the income? How do they get some of those benefits? How do you use those benefits? What can they get on those benefits? So in addition to knowing the grocery structure there, what we can get those stores, what benefits can they?
I have another example in Miami, depending on what high school you live in and what area, where in Miami in general, there's a high chance that the majority of the parents at home, or a large percentage of parents at home, speak Spanish as their first language and may not speak English. And so a lot of our high school athletic trainers, if they send, you know, instructions at home in English, or if they send pamphlets or educational materials in English, it's a high chance that parents aren't able to read those instructions or pamphlets. So we were proactive, and we actually have a lot of those things translated, and now there's the English version, and in the back there's a Spanish version. And that's an example of that equality versus equity. If you send someone home with instructions that aren't useful for them because they can't read it, you're not treating everyone equitably.
You know, anyone in the audience have any questions they'd like to ask? I'll keep going while you keep thinking. I would like to invite Enzo, or so happy that you're here. Maybe a chance to offer some of your reflections on hearing about the athletic training profession talk about some of these things, and maybe what you expect as a patient to be receiving as part of your experience with healthcare.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Yes, and just from the perspective of being an athlete for several years, like most athletes, several concussions, traumatic eye injury, participated in progress. So I usually end up being friends with my athletic trainer just because I'm there so much. And over the years, I come to understand that if I want to get better, if I want to keep playing, it's typically the case that I have to have a relationship with my athletic trainer. The doctor I may see once a week or twice a week or every week. But the athletic trainer is one person I'm in constant contact with. And you know, whether I get better or not, whether I jump back into playing and I myself, depends on how that relationship is, and to just being here to be here. This side of things, as opposed to being an athlete who just comes in and out, but talks to this straight individual and they well. I really do think that it's wonderful that this conversation is actually happening. It's not everyone is the same. Intolerance is an example in my experience, but sometimes pain is discounted and totally dismissed by athletic trainers, but not by others, and sometimes even by doctors. And so to hear about equity and quality being a part of the discussion.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody want to respond to react to that? Let me switch gears a little bit. You talked about some examples of how to incorporate this into the education and preparation of the next generation of athletic trainers. What other things can educators be doing to help set our students up for success to practice with cultural competency, and not just that, but the skills and the knowledge too? And that's for everyone who's not.
Well, I would say it starts by making sure that these conversations are infused throughout the curriculum. it's really hard, as you can see, I try to cover as much as I could in a short amount of time. There's so many things to talk about and so many different ways, there's so many things to consider. That I think it has to be introduced throughout the program. I mean, there's small ways to do that. If you have a scenario and you're going over a scenario, stop and think, how might that be different if the patient couldn't afford to go to the hospital? How might this situation be different if the patient was experiencing this? Or if you're talking about skin injuries, I think we automatically assume that everyone's skin is the same color. What might this look like in someone who has darker skin? What might this look like for someone else? And so it doesn't always have to be in a whole lecture about diversity or about patient values. If we read a position statement, we can read that position statement and say, how might this be different for the different populations that I work with? And I think the more that we have those conversations about different patients versus reading something or reading a scenario one way, the more that we get to say, hey, this is the way we can adapt things, this is the way that we can change it based on who our patient is.
I think one of the prerequisites is, one, to have the conversation, but also to have students who are future healthcare providers look at their own biases, their own implicit biases, because there are strategies that we can use in education to reduce biases of future healthcare providers. Because like Dr. Harriell said, healthcare providers are not exempt from having these biases. So until we recognize them ourselves, it's hard to move forward. So I would say that's as educators, that's part of our role too. So thread it throughout the curriculum, but also have students. Biases. It's uncomfortable to do, but
And I would add, as well as like taking a look at where your curriculum has and looking for holes in the curriculum and really encouraging interprofessional collaboration. A lot of culture competence, culture humility, started out as transcultural diversity. And so while this is really budding and new in athletic training, it's not in a lot of other allied health professions. And so when you're situated, especially like the flu that had access to all the other healthcare programs, is that can you encourage interprofessional collaboration? Can you leverage other resources that you all have at your disposal? And then just looking at like things that you might require in your program. One of the things that was really interesting to me, I did my undergraduate in professional studies at UNC Chapel Hill. And one of our requirements is that we had to have a foreign language competency. So I had to take 3 years of Spanish at Chapel Hill. It is one of those things that you don't think directly relates to athletic training until you get into a community that doesn't speak English. And so it's like, can you, I know as we transition to the interlevel classroom, we fully transition, that might be a little bit difficult. But is there flexibility within your tuition or within your program? Can you encourage that language lesson? That how can you be creative and not have to reinvent it just because this is doing that
Right on.
Two things. Number one, thank you, Destinee, because when we were doing through curriculum changes, I held on to the foreign language requirement in our program. So it's something that means a lot. Number two, often our profession, educators in our profession do not have the same demographic mix that our patients. How do you, number one, help those people who may not come from a background where they consciously understand their own biases? Number two is how do we develop a workforce that better represents the mix of people here? Good question.
It is a big question. That's what we're talking about. I think I can answer the second part. Obviously, if you pay for the profession, don't and so you don't define people like myself. I issues or that's a lot of stuff. I'm not considering athletic training, even though it's one who feels it's something that you can do and you feel so satisfied with your life is taking care of people. I have that sort of passion to do that to take care of people, but it's just not feasible in some position. And so I think personally, just having conversations with so many different other trainers over the years, I think it's a profession that is supposed to be appreciated and valued in the society where athletic trainers come in 6 a.m. and they're until 8 p.m. every single day, and they're being paid. So if unless the profession is somewhat rewarded or equity, I don't think it will be.
I'm gonna put the spotlight on Jim here, as their clinical education coordinator, using those clinical opportunities, making the most that you can out of those, and really placing people, environments that are new to them, that they wouldn't expect themselves to be in, that they would never think, oh, this is where I want to practice, if this community really speaks to me. It's, it's like, how can we say, sure, this might not be the most linear step in your career, this might not make the most sense on paper, but I think this opportunity will be really good for you. And I do think that you have to do some care on your behalf too, to say, this is a community that's new to you. How can you be a part of this community and learn and, harm them and never like actively harm people, but harming people through ignorance, harming people through that advice that you don't know that you have. And so it's preparing people to be in those environments and then giving them the opportunities.
A question about advocacy. Dr. Harrell, you were talking about advocating for our patients. And you also mentioned about social determinants of health. And I think of some of those as being larger constructs that are what we're comfortable advocating for. And not to bring it down and talk about public policy, but that's an area of interest of mine. And I think about how could we as ATs and AT students advocate for some of these larger scale issues. We're used to going to do a day on the hill and advocating for our profession to get more direct access to patients or, or to change our practice act or something like that. How can we as healthcare providers, advocate for some of these larger scale issues, such as the built environment? I'm thinking of, people in underserved areas and they have no access to parks and no sidewalks. And, how can we broach that subject with policymakers and those who can affect change?
Yeah, I think you mentioned some things that were really important. Some of the Capitol Hill days, whether it's in the state or at the national level, I've participated in both types of those activities. And I think when you get involved in a Capitol Hill day and look at some of the policies that are out there, you actually see change and you know that you were part of that change, is very motivating, because I think we often underestimate how much of a voice we have. I was able to go to DC and sit with my congressman and my senator and fight for the Sports Medicine Literacy Act, and didn't pass the first time, it passed the second time, and now the law exists. And I know I was a part of, maybe a small part of helping to make sure that the people in my state knew how that was important for healthcare providers and the sports medicine team. And I think when you do that, it gives you a sense of, if I can do that at the national level, I can definitely do that at the state level. And we know a lot of things happen at the local level. And we actually even have more access at the local level than you do at the national level. And I say empower people to let them know that as a taxpayer, as a citizen of this community, you have the right to for your voice to be heard. And there's tons of ways to get involved at the local level. There's tons of ways that you can spend your money to make sure that you're going to nonprofits who are doing work that's similar to this. But I think really becoming an advocate at the local level in your community is best. And if you want to know what that looks like and kind of have a roadmap for that, doing some of those big, large things with national organizations really kind of helps to give you a toolkit, if you will. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you.
I may actually add on some that one. I think you spoke to the unique role of the athletic trainer and the relationship that we have with the patients, as compared to many other healthcare providers. spending time with them day in, day out, and they're having their loads. As it relates to advocacy, a lot of what speaks to policymakers and decision makers is the public health lens over all of that and the bigger issue at play. But being able to tie those with the individual patient stories that we hear and interact with speaks volumes. When you're advocating, you as an athletic trainer actually have an advantage to be able to speak to the population from which your patients are coming from, but also tie it directly to that patient story and how it's affecting an actual person. And it's very, very powerful in those situations. Other questions from the audience?
So I have a question, because we're gonna be going out, in a couple of years, starting a new job. How would you approach or initiate a conversation if you go into a new job with a lot of power and you notice that it's not a very welcoming environment, it's not culture competent, and you don't know how to address that with your boss, and you don't really have the power or the say to do that when you're really hired as your role or trying to step over the head of the boss to fix that environment for your patient. That's a weird.
I'll give some time, I'll summarize what you that I might not have heard. The question is coming from a academic training student that is seeking some advice on how to navigate challenging work environments where they may not feel that the environment is one that is culturally competent and navigate this conversation through tough and potentially have an impact on their role, their job security.
I'll take a stab at it. One of the things that I think is really powerful about athletic training is this the cloak of invisibility that we have. Like, I'm the only AT at my high school, like everyone knows me, but like no one knows what I do, right? And so it's like if I were to put up like gender neutral signs in my classroom, or I were to put like no one is going to ask me. So use that to your advantage. I'm a big proponent of ask for forgiveness, not permission. And when you do get in trouble for things, that's an opportunity to have a conversation. The conflict is already built in, so you can't make it any worse. and so, I don't, like just starting, I would say starting trouble, but taking the leverage where you can and understanding, that you can defend what you're doing. There's a lot of evidence behind what you're doing, and ultimately you can demonstrate that you're making your facility, you're making the practice more inclusive for folks. That's kind of my advice.
I think it's different levels to that, and I think it's oftentimes easier for us to fight when we see something happen when our patients are in positions that are not right or not welcoming, but when it's happening to us, it's a little harder to deal with sometimes. And so what I would advise you is to have a conversation with whoever's in charge. If you feel like the person that's in charge might be the one leading that environment or that culture, then definitely talk to your clinical coordinator of clinical education. That would be a good place to start, just to let them know what's happening, to see if they have any advice for you, because they more likely they know who the preceptor is, they've known them for a while or done preceptor training, they might be able to give you insight. But if it's at a level that you feel that is urgent, or that your mental well-being or your safety is at effect, you have to escalate that faster than trying to kind of maneuver around and let people know that something may not feel right. So it's different levels. But you can always call me and
She was handing out business cards on West. Other audience questions?
Mine's for Dr. Rahman. So you were talking about how an area of studies is the transgender population. It's becoming more prominent in sports. So could you speak on the needs nutrition wise of that population?
So are you looking specifically for like energy needs?
Yeah, just anything that you think you would need to know as they're athletic trainer.
That's a really good question. So I think one of the most common questions I get is how do we calculate energy needs? So are we using sex assigned at birth, or are we using your gender now? And I don't want to sound flippant, but sometimes I say it doesn't really matter. Ask them how they want us to calculate. So let's say some energy needs comes up a lot. So in this area of sports too, like, are they eating enough? The general rule of thumb right now, because we don't have answers, because the research is so new in this area, is to take sort of the middle. So calculate needs based on sex assigned at birth, calculate needs based on their generated. Something in the middle, and then play around with this. As a so we don't have like a clear cut answer for you, but that in general we take the middle. We may take the middle. We're working on research now for concrete answers. So we're doing a lot of work in that area. Guys, those are product questions.
Other questions from the audience? A couple of you touched on foreign language as a component of providing information that's digestible and understandable to the patients. I wonder if we might speak a little bit on other examples of where health literacy needs to be accounted for and outside of foreign language as well, maybe even just navigating the healthcare system and the big words that come up as part of that, not just for the patient, but for the patient's family, that kind of thing. It's kind of open that up for anyone who would like to learn more about health literacy and how we might address that component of quality education.
I think one of the aspects of my life as an athlete where I struggled was with energy at the time. So coming in from Nigeria, I was used to diet, and I often like try to talk to the doctors and my ATs about how my needs were different. Coaches never understand, right? So the coaches need to one size fits all sort of information. If I think so, if I ask them, everything is expected of the team. And so having an AT so understood the fact that people were that different is really helpful to celebrate and figure out that I can do a different diet. When I first started, yes, with time I adapted to the American diet. Maybe adapted is a strong word. I'm still adapting to it. It's 8 years. But just having someone like my own to say, okay, I hear you, I understand this is a possibility.
The importance of having dietitian.
Yes, and dietitian too. With the AT's help, I was able to make it a dietitian. So figure out what I need to function on a daily basis.
A really simple answer, and that is, I mean, I think it goes across the board. It's not to make assumptions, not to assume that people understand what that means. I think oftentimes, when we talk with each other, we may use big terms. So sometimes we talk to our friends, we may say some things that are like, what? And then you have to stop and go, I meant this. And I think what our patients do it a lot as well. So don't assume patients know what to do. I'll give you a really interesting example of, there was a story where an athletic trainer gave a really big football player who had a cold some medication and said, take this. And he was giving them packets that said how many to take, and they were individually dosed, and this is what you should take for your cold, and take this. And because the athlete trusts the athletic trainer, and he said, take this, the person took the whole handful of medicine. And something as simple as we said, take this. They didn't say, take a pack or read the directions. And so I really think a lot of the health literacy stuff not only goes with words and terminology, but instructions and culture and understanding that some people will trust what you say and not read the directions. So you really have to be careful and not make assumptions that people know what you mean. Evidently that guy was really big, and thank God he was really big, it was okay, but it's a whole lot of cold medicines.
As someone who works in the secondary school setting, this comes up every day. My patients are 14 to 19, and then we have parents and guardians that are not in high school, and so, you know, on a daily basis, I'm doing one set of health literacy, and then also at the same time, doing another set of health literacy. And it's really not making assumptions, it's really stopping after every like little piece of eval, when we get to the assessment, you know, I'm working through all my differentials. It's really stopping to understand what's going on. That is making it. Do you have a question? Is this addressing your concerns? You know, and they might not know all the anatomical terms or that, you know, all the actual terminology, but they know what is important to them. And you can ask them that and make sure you're getting their questions addressed. You know. An example today, one of my team doctors called, and one of my kids, after my session was here, that patient's mom calls and they're like, yeah, he's got that shoulder surgery, no wrong biceps, you know, and it's like working through that, you know, it's not laughing at them, that's a common mistake that, you know, I wouldn't expect non-medical professionals to understand. So it's just, no, actually, this is what's going on, and then after we make that correction, get everyone on the same page, you know, do you have other questions? Does that make sense now? So it's really just having a lot of conversation.
So Destinee, I appreciate being called out, because I think, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So in the framework of what we're talking about today in terms of cultural competence, we're not talking about cultural proficiency. There's a difference between competency and proficiency. So as I think about the athletic training students in the room, and I think about what Dr. Harriell said about, you know, really being patient-centered in our approach and asking the patient what's most important to them. And I think, because we all have these built-in blind spots that we just don't always see, if we truly practice patient-centered care in a really consistent way, isn't that a great place to start in terms of developing individual cultural competency? As long as we're always taking into account the direct needs of the patient as they express them to us, and that's only possible if we get great distract. I close.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm glad you brought up cultural proficiency. There is a model that talks about that, and proficiency to me illustrates stagnancy, like I become proficient and I can be complacent now. And so I do like to talk about cultural competency, and for those of you who didn't hear me speak at all, it's important that you define what that means for you. And like in my personal definition of cultural competency, it includes that ongoing training piece. And so like every day I'm trying to be a little bit better than I was the day before. And every day that I learn something new, you know, I'm okay saying, I'm sorry, I didn't know that, or thank you for teaching me this, you know, and that's my toolkit now. So I think it's bringing that humility, it's understanding that building mistakes, and it's understanding that every day and every experience is an opportunity to grow.
Just one quick comment on that. Jonathan Smith, who was our kind of our leader of diversity here at St. Diversity Office here, spoke to cultural fluency. So fluency is like a language. You can always speak better, right? You can always get better at it. It's an evolutionary skill. And so he would speak to that at this level of cultural fluency where you get to a point where you're functional, but then you can always get better at it.
Yeah, I have one final question. In thinking about the athletic trainer as one of the most acceptable healthcare providers for student athletes and other active members of the active population, when the care, and we talk about interprofessional practice, when care is necessary beyond the scope of the athletic trainer, but there are some barriers to accessing that care, what might be community resources that we as other peers can be looking for, can be keeping an eye out for, that might help remove some of those barriers and be more accessible to some of the patient populations we live in?
That's a really good question. One of the ways that I held myself to these stakeholders when I first started 4 years ago, it's just asking a lot of questions, trying to get a community. A lot of times with athletic trainers will, especially in high school setting, we'll get the students come in and be like, oh, you have to the doctor. And sometimes, you know, that can be a little bit frustrating now that we'll inevitably alter our care plan. But I'm like, tell me more about it, where did you go to the doctor, how did you get there? You know, and sometimes that's a free clinic, sometimes, anything else we do have a school-based clinic, that's not full service, but we can go to that clinic and say, hey, we need to. You know, help this one. Really just asking a lot of questions, eavesdropping a lot, I said, I close up invisibility, use it. You know, Google is there, so there's a lot of ways, but it really puts the ground, it's just being naturally.
I try to learn as much as I can about different community events that are going on. And if you really want to, you can find a different one or a different medical test maybe offered for free or close to nothing. For example, in February, you get a lot of heart exams or a calcium CT test for $20, where it normally would be maybe outreach, or maybe there is a dental bus or a dental school that's having their students that are about to leave the dental college do exams for free or for low cost. So really having a resource or a list of all these things that come up, you know, October for mammograms, if someone is a mammogram that's expensive or even free. So really gathering all your resources, and then it goes back to that activity that I told you about. The students map out what's in the community. If there's a community center, really tapping that community center and saying, what services do you offer? Are there any opportunities for our students to see, you know, a healthcare professional that might not normally be there? And really kind of keeping those resources updated, so when students are in need, you know, they pick up the phone and ask if it needs some resources available.
Any other comments on that? The panelists have anything else they want to share that maybe they didn't get an opportunity to do tonight?
Well, I figured the reason of that is slightly because I written a thesis on income inequality, how that impacts healthcare outcomes, for instance, the COVID-19 pandemic. People within the bottom quintile have suffered more fatalities than the top end. So it's a conversation that even in sports is not had enough, where athletes come in and the care programs that people receive, right? Myself, as an example, I'm a long way from home, and I typically have to take care of myself, talks to my mates, line up with the types of appointments. The care that people receive in the country is significantly dependent upon this, how much they have, right? Economic inequality impacts that. And so I think it's something that should be talked about a lot more by the example. And by the training, just so we understand that not every athlete comes from the same background, regardless of the sport they play. Everyone's financial capability is different than the next person's, and all of that should be considered when we're looking at how to treat something.
Thank you for sharing. Final remarks?
I would just say, make sure you empower your patients. Really tell them that they are part of their healthcare team, and if they're going to another healthcare provider, make sure that they know that they have options, that they can ask questions, that they don't have to necessarily take the first option. They can ask for additional options for care, because I get a lot of times family members say, so why did you ask if you could wait and do the surgery next week? You're gonna have to get me work. You may not can do that. Of course you can do that. And so that last statement I made is really make sure your patients know that they're a part of their healthcare team. They should, to the best of their ability, feel empowered to ask questions and learn more about their body and what's.
The last thing I would add is that even us as individual providers have a lot of capacity to impact every interaction somebody has with us, you know, as healthcare providers. So take that opportunity to, as much as you can, to have a really good experience for that patient. like I'm speaking specifically from the transgender lens. So these are individuals that may have gone to a few different healthcare providers and not gotten the help, the care that they needed, because of discrimination, bias, and a lot of other things. And so you could be that one person who they have a good healthcare interaction, they may come back for the healthcare that they really need, that they might be able to need in other areas. So you could be that one person who may feel like you're not making a huge impact, but you really can, in every single interaction you have with the patient.
Well, thank you to our wonderful panelists. That was an excellent discussion. Really appreciate it. Thank you to our HTA leadership as well, and for all of you for attending. I believe there is a reception. Words to make for me.
Real quick. I do not want to be the one standing between you and free pizza, but there is free pizza out the door. There is bottled water too. If you need a parking pass, we do have parking passes over here. I want to thank everybody's attendance today and attentiveness. Thank everybody on Zoom land for attending as well. And thank you to our speakers.